They thought he was just an old man, a visitor who had wandered too far into the wrong hospital wing. No uniform, no badge, no authority. The captain stopped him without hesitation. "This area is restricted," he said sharply, his eyes scanning the red, checkered shirt with quiet disgust. The old man didn't argue, didn't raise his voice. He only looked at the officer lying unconscious on the bed, fighting a battle no one else could win. Doctors rushed. Machines beeped faster. Time was slipping. When the captain turned away, the old man stepped closer and leaned down. What he whispered was not loud, but it carried decades of war, blood, and silence. One call sign, just 2 words, and suddenly, the captain's face drained of color, because some names are never written in files. Some heroes never ask to be remembered, and some whispers are. The military hospital was unusually quiet for a weekday afternoon. The polished floors reflected the harsh overhead lights, and the sterile scent of antiseptic filled the air. Nurses hurried from room to room, checking monitors and adjusting IVs, while doctors discussed treatment plans in low murmurs. But the calm was broken when a figure appeared at the end of the hallway. He was an old man, shoulders slightly stooped, hair white but thick, and a beard that told stories of decades long past. His eyes, sharp and piercing, scanned the corridor. He wasn't wearing a uniform, nor did he carry any identification. Just a red checkered flannel shirt, simple trousers, and worn boots. At first glance, he looked out of place, a civilian wandering into a military domain. The young captain on duty noticed him immediately. Protocols were clear: no unauthorized personnel in patient areas, especially near critical cases. With a brisk stride, the captain intercepted him. "This area is restricted," he said sharply, blocking his path. His eyes flicked from the old man's shirt to his face, scrutinizing every line of it. "You need to leave." The old man didn't speak. He merely nodded slightly, as if acknowledging the authority, but without fear. Then, slowly, he moved toward a bed at the center of the room. There, a high-ranking officer lay unconscious, hooked to monitors and life-saving machines. Metals glinted on his uniform, polished to a mirror shine, and his chest rose and fell with shallow, labored breaths. Doctors and nurses paused. Even in the chaos of the hospital, there was a strange tension. The old man's presence seemed to freeze time. He leaned over the bed, his hands trembling only slightly, gripping the officer's collar. The room fell silent. Everyone watched, unsure what would happen next. The captain felt his chest tighten. Who was this man, and why did he dare approach someone so important? He raised his voice, intending to assert control. But before he could speak, the old man whispered something, almost inaudible, carried with a weight far heavier than words should hold. The captain froze. Something in that whisper cut through the years, the discipline, the hierarchy. Decades of battles, secrets, and sacrifice hung in the air. Nurses exchanged glances. Even the machines seemed to slow their beeping. It wasn't just a name. It was a history, a legacy, and a warning all at once. The old man straightened slightly, eyes locked on the officer. He was no stranger here. He belonged, and suddenly everyone in the room realized that they had been mistaken. The words were simple. 2 syllables, a call sign from a time when the world was cruel and survival demanded courage no one could imagine. "Night Widow," the old man whispered. Instantly, the atmosphere shifted. The captain's face drained of color, his authority crumbling. He had heard of Night Widow before, a legendary operative whose missions were classified, whose exploits had shaped the outcomes of wars quietly, invisibly. And here he was, standing in front of the captain, older, slower, but every bit as formidable as the story suggested. Nurses stepped back, eyes wide. The other officers in the room couldn't speak. Even the unconscious soldier seemed to command attention now, as if the name had awakened something inside the walls themselves. The captain's mind raced. How could this man, looking like a simple, frail old veteran, carry such weight? Every story he had learned in school about heroes, medals, and glory suddenly felt hollow. This was a living legend, A man who had given everything for the nation and asked nothing in return. The captain stammered, words failing him. The old man's eyes, calm but intense, never wavered. They spoke of battles fought in silence, of comrades lost, of secrets that could never leave the shadows. And yet here he was, protecting someone else, still serving, still vigilant. The room seemed to exhale collectively. The nurses adjusted the monitors, doctors resumed their duties, but the air was different, respectful, tense, and reverent. Even those who had laughed moments ago, assuming this was a simple intrusion, now stood in awe. For a long moment, the old man stayed by the officer, gently adjusting his position, checking the lines and monitors with meticulous care. The captain watched, realizing that he had just witnessed something far greater than any rank or medal. Respect was earned not by titles, but by courage, sacrifice, and humility. Finally, the old man straightened. His task completed. He didn't seek thanks, nor did he demand acknowledgement. He simply nodded once, a subtle gesture of authority that needed no words. Then, as quietly as he had arrived, he turned and left. The captain remained frozen in place, heart pounding. He had thought he understood the meaning of service. He had been wrong. And in that hospital room, among doctors, nurses, and life-saving machines, he had just learned a lesson he would never forget. Some heroes wear no uniform, carry no badge, and yet command the deepest respect of all. As the old man walked down the corridor, the hospital seemed to fade around him. In his mind, he was no longer in a sterile building with polished floors and blinking monitors. He was back on the battlefield, the world reduced to mud, smoke, and the constant echo of gunfire. Each step reminded him of comrades long gone, the weight of responsibility pressing down like a leaden coat. Every mission he had undertaken, every life he had saved, and every life he had lost played like a silent film behind his eyes. The whispers of the past were louder than any voice in the present. He remembered the first time he had earned the call sign Night Widow. It was during a mission so dangerous that every man involved had expected to die. The enemy had surrounded them, heavy artillery raining down, and yet somehow, through courage, cunning, and sheer will, he had led his team to survive. That night, the moon had witnessed his vow to protect the innocent, to fight silently, and to never let his legacy be defined by medals or fame. In the present, he could feel the respect radiating from those who had only just recognized him. The captain, stunned and humbled, now understood the gravity of the man standing in his hospital hallway. But it wasn't glory that the old man sought. He didn't need accolades. He never had. His reward was simple: the continued safety of those he served and the quiet satisfaction of a duty fulfilled. As he moved past the nurses and doctors, memories of laughter, fear, loss, and victory intertwined. The young soldiers he had trained, the missions he had led, the friends who had never returned, all of it was stitched into the fabric of who he was. And though his body was now older, worn by decades of service, the spirit of a warrior remained unbroken. The hospital lights reflected in his eyes, but they could not dim the fire that still burned within. Even in retirement, even outside the battlefield, he carried the weight of every soldier, every life, and every choice. And as he passed the room where the unconscious officer lay, he glanced once more, a silent promise that no one would ever fight alone while he was there. By now, the captain had begun to comprehend the enormity of what had just occurred. He had confronted what he thought was an ordinary old man, only to be confronted with the living embodiment of legend and sacrifice. The realization hit him like a hammer. Respect is not commanded by rank. It is earned through courage, loyalty, and deeds that leave a mark on history. The room was silent as the staff returned to their duties, but the memory of the encounter lingered. Doctors whispered to one another, nurses exchanged knowing glances, and the young captain replayed the moment over and over in his mind. That whisper, "Night Widow," had shattered assumptions and reminded everyone present of the invisible heroes among them. He remembered reading the reports, the declassified missions, the stories tucked away in archives. But no document, no medal, no honor roll could capture the weight of what it meant to be Night Widow. It was not about recognition. It was about integrity, selflessness, and the quiet power of experience. The old man, meanwhile, moved down the hallway with deliberate calm. Each step carried a history of battles fought, victories won, and comrades mourned. He had seen the worst humanity could offer, and yet he had chosen to stand for something greater. The captain, watching from a distance, finally understood that bravery is not always loud. Sometimes it is quiet, patient, and unassuming. The nurse who had been closest to the bed spoke softly to the captain. "He saved more lives than we'll ever know," she said. The captain nodded, a lump in his throat. He realized that he had learned one of the most important lessons of his career in just a few fleeting moments: humility. Later, when the officer regained consciousness, the old man was nowhere to be found. But the impact of his presence remained. The captain, once proud and certain, now carried a newfound reverence for those who serve silently, without expectation of recognition. And somewhere in the quiet corners of the hospital, the legend of Night Widow would continue to inspire, reminding everyone that true heroism is measured not by what is seen, but by what is done when no one is watching. Hours later, the hospital had settled into its quiet rhythm again. Machines beeped steadily, nurses moved efficiently, and doctors whispered updates about recovering patients. Yet the air was different, heavier with respect, reverent silence, and the weight of stories untold. The captain sat alone in the break room, replaying the events over and over. He remembered the old man's whisper, the way he had leaned over the unconscious officer, the intensity in his eyes that had seemed to carry decades of battles, scars, and secrets. He realized that he had been wrong to judge at first glance. He had assumed this man was nothing more than a visitor. But Night Widow was a living testament to courage, humility, and unspoken heroism. Across the hospital, the nurses and junior officers talked in hushed tones about what had just happened. Some had laughed when the old man first appeared, assuming he was harmless, even comical. Now no one laughed. Every gesture, every whisper, every silent act had proven his worth beyond question. He had saved a life in a way no one else could have, with authority earned through decades of sacrifice, not medals or rank. Later that evening, the officer regained consciousness. His eyes opened slowly, blinking against the harsh hospital lights. "Oh, who was that?" he asked weakly, voice barely audible. The captain hesitated. He could have remained silent, left the story untold, and let the memory fade. But the truth burned too brightly to ignore. "That was a legend," the captain admitted, voice shaking. "Night Widow, a hero you never forget. A man who has given more than anyone else here could ever imagine." Tears glistened in the officer's eyes, not just from relief, but from understanding, from recognizing the magnitude of what had occurred. It wasn't about glory. It was about respect, courage, and the silent guardians who walk among us, unnoticed until a moment demands everything from them. And the old man? He never returned to the spotlight. There were no celebrations, no announcements, no cameras rolling. He simply walked away, leaving behind a room transformed by a single whisper, a simple act of care, and a legacy that would echo far beyond that hospital corridor. The captain finally understood what he had learned that day. True heroism does not announce itself. It does not demand attention. It is quiet, patient, and enduring. It is in the moments when someone chooses to act, not for recognition, but because it is the right thing to do. In the heart of that hospital, among machines, doctors, and nurses, the legend of Night Widow lived on. A reminder that respect is earned, courage is timeless, and some heroes remain unforgettable long after they have left the room.